Jeff. I don't see in the room, so this will be fairly safe. So back when we were doing the mobile app, something that kind of reminded me of Jeff Traum as a CTO was we would release nightly builds, and of course all the engineers and UX people would download the nightly builds. I'll give you one quick guess who was the #1 downloader of nightly builds for our Android platform. That'd be Jeff. Jeff had his machines flagged, and we kind of laughed at the fact that he even downloaded the nightly builds often more than the engineer team. So clearly not micromanaging, more about a CTO who cares about the products we're releasing. So that tells you a little bit about Jeff. Last year I talked a little bit and wanted to explain about how do we do UX within a large enterprise company. And some of the feedback I received was, hey, that was great, nice 30,000 foot view. Could you maybe dive into some more of the practical aspects of what it looks like to build things people want to buy? Because whether you're an engineer, UX team, product manager, entrepreneur, we're all here to build stuff that hopefully people will use and want to buy. So the spoiler alert for this presentation is every solution you're going to build has features. However, we all know through things we've used in the past that using a bunch of features doesn't always mean a solution. So solutions always are made up of features, but not all features end up to be a solution. And that's kind of what we're going to go over today. I think I'm going to do real good on time, so no one should need to go and be hungry for noon. So I pulled some quick just illustrations. So I'm sure many of us, if we've been in the industry for any amount of time, we've all worked on teams or worked for companies where you get something like this. Somebody shows up and the engineer or the UX person says, hey, we can't do all this right. You either have only so much time, so many resources, or so much money. And basically someone pushes back and says, you know, I don't really care, like you should just do this. And that doesn't always make for the best work environment. Or you kind of get something like this where management comes in with a consultant, new employee, someone who wants to change the game, and he basically just says, hey, you just need to build a whole bunch more stuff. And as someone in R&D, you kind of just look at this person and go, what are you talking about? It's impossible to ship this many things that quickly, or these features don't have any purpose, so what are we doing? So you end up with these endless requests of features to build, you know, basically hoping you end up somewhere that equals success, whether, you know, that means more users, more money, more employees, whatever that may look like. Don't worry though, this whole talk is really going to point out the fact that you're not alone. We all have to deal with this, and some of the data that I pulled talked about, you know, recently a book came out on user research, and it looked at interviewing 200 startup managers and founders in the enterprise B2B segment. And basically, a vast majority said that they were all keeping a list of things they wanted to build. And if you're currently in a startup phase or looking to scale your company to the next level, everybody's got a punch list. I'm sure if we pulled up Jira and looked at people's backlogs, it's full of things that we think this will be the next big thing that we need to build. Again, the reality though is not all features end up as a solution. So before we dive into what a solution looks like, how do you know if you're currently on a team or working for a company that really is only interested in releasing a whole bunch of features? Pulled out some comical examples. So soon, recently deceased Fire Phone. Couldn't compete. You know, you put a Fire Phone even next to an Android device or an iPhone, it doesn't do anything that I can't get better somewhere else. But yet they spent a lot of money putting in something that was really just different packaging. Or you could be like Nike. You know, Nike released, they were pretty early into the game. They had a number of fitness products aimed at consumers very early on that honestly just rode the crest of the Nike logo. Nike thought because it said Nike that you would buy it. But the reality is, everybody could use the app without the fitness band. Nobody needed to buy the fitness band. And in fact, if you did buy the fitness band, it gave you some weird number that had absolutely zero merit on what it was actually doing. So again, number of features, but really didn't provide any sort of solution. And then you have a long list of kind of the Me Too features. Here's some social media networks that continue just to try and replicate the recipe that Google did. Kind of an interesting quote here, you know, trying to beat Facebook at its own game is like trying to beat Google in search. Good luck, but you know, I don't know how many of you guys are registered for Diaspora, or what was the other one? It was like Elo or some kind of creative network. Nobody uses these things because they're pixel for pixel matching features with somebody that's already won in that area. And they're not doing anything to solve a new problem. So that's great. I mean, you got Nike, you got MySpace, you have Amazon. These guys have big budgets. They put a lot of money. I couldn't even tell you how much Amazon lost on its hardware with the phone. But I imagine it was a lot. So really what I want to kind of camp out at is what is going to work? How do we get better? If we can't, compete pixel for pixel with a Facebook, or we can't have a marketing budget like Nike, how do we as engineers and designers and product leaders release stuff? Well, I mentioned earlier that 198 of the startup people were keeping a list of things that they wanted to build, features, a punch list, things that they thought we could just push out there and then magic would happen. What's most impressive is what the other two people in this survey said. These founders were actually keeping a list of problems they wanted to solve. They chose to fall in love with the problem that their users had, rather than just keeping a series of feature list items that they wanted to have engineering build and release. And that's really the distinction here. If you can kind of grasp onto that idea of looking at what problem a user has that you can come in and fill a niche, you'll see the features that you're releasing have an incredible amount of value. So this is one, I was thinking about a problem, up 10 years ago, we all had these huge amplifiers and a big speaker system, and they had wires everywhere. And then you'd have to buy a CD component, and then you'd have to buy a tape component, or maybe you got to skip that whole thing. But I never made enough money to buy any of that stuff, so I just kind of went without. But I did spend a lot of money on this Sonos Play Bar, which they don't give away. It is expensive. But I was thinking about products that really solved the problem for me, and things I could talk to you guys about, and really just help you relate and kind of connect the dots. So if you think about the first time you ever used a really great product, whether it was digital, a kitchen utensil, whatever it was, something in your car, it filled a niche that you didn't otherwise have a solution for. Using something like the Sonos Play Bar, it didn't feel like they literally made it for me, but it felt like it was designed for me. It didn't have a whole bunch of cables. I could take it out of the box, I could hang it on a wall, I could stick it in front of the TV. It didn't really matter, but it was very easy. I didn't need to have any sort of AV background to get this thing up and running. I took it out of the box, I plugged it in, and I was off and running. The software was incredible. I could have it on my phone, I could have it on a tablet, I could have it on my wife's phone, my kid's tablet, wherever. I had instant control over how to make this thing do what I wanted, which was play music in different parts of the house. I never read documentation. In fact, I don't even think Sonos included documentation in the box. It's like, hey, plug it in, download the app, get going. Another thing is, it's not just about this one thing I had. I mean, yeah, I can use it by itself, and I can have it play music for me in one part of the room, but I didn't buy it because I knew about all these other things I could do with it. I bought it because it solved one problem for me. And then as I began using it, I realized, hey, there's other things I can do. I can have a network bridge that lets it go wireless, so I don't need to be near a router or have any sort of Ethernet cable go plug into it. And then I have all these other different things that I can add on. So I can set up something for my office, or I can set something up in the bedroom, or wherever I want outside. I can extend this really great experience I'm already having. So I didn't even know everything it could do. I bought it anyway, and it solved a really great problem. And honestly, that made me say wow while using it. All of a sudden, the $700 that doesn't make any sense to spend, there was instant value. It solved the problem for something I didn't have a solution for currently. So you're probably thinking, okay, no big deal, right? And you're right. Because the beauty of well-designed products is that it quickly embeds itself into your lifestyle. In fact, now if I just leave my Sonos playing and I drive off to work, it stops when it gets out of range. And as I drive back home, guess what? I walk into a house with music playing. And I didn't really have to do anything. And that is kind of the aha moment that we all have with these great products. A product that is really, really good just embeds itself in your day-to-day lifestyle. And it's kind of the blessing and the curse of developing really great things is often they go unacknowledged because people just expect it to work that way. And so that's another really kind of good litmus test for whether or not you're providing a solution versus just a number of features. I have another really good example that I kind of wanted to walk through before we talk about some of the practical application. Let's look at Uber. So why didn't Uber just buy a bunch of Lamborghinis and throw a taxi on the top of it and send them off? Well, they kind of did, because at the core value, Uber is a taxi, but they do have a lot of other things that kind of allow their consumers, their users, to have these wow moments. They solve some pain points that taxis never really are still trying to catch up to. Here's just a couple. So when you look at Uber and you look at their wow moments, the moments that they give their users that get them a lot of support, get them a lot of users, ultimately get them a lot of revenue, they had some things that they were doing with their software, and of course their hardware being the car that's driving around. One of them is, how do I know? I'm at a restaurant, maybe I'm at a bar, I had too much to drink. How do I know? Like, am I gonna just stand out on the curb and like try and hail a taxi down? No, you can pick up your phone, you can use their app, and you can see exactly where a taxi is. So you know, I don't have to leave until something is near me. How do I know when the driver's gonna show up? With the old school model of taxis, you're out there, maybe there's 5 other people, you're all trying to get home. It's really first come, first serve. You always see kind of the things in New York City where someone jets in front of the person, to get into the taxi and take it first. With this, you basically request it and it just shows up and it'll let you know right when they're there. What if I don't have any money? Doesn't matter. Uber's already stored your credit card information. You don't need to show them anything other than who you are. You get in the car, they take you to where you want to go. All the details of what you used to have to do with a taxi. Hey, could you stop at the liquor store or somewhere so I can get some cash or whatever? That's all handled now. So another very distinct wow moment that Uber's created. Even down to a tip. I didn't really understand this until I started using it, but based on who it is that's picking you up, how far you're going, things like that. We do a user conference, and the last 2 years it's been down in Orlando. The last 2 years going to Orlando, nobody rented a car from the airport. Everybody just took Uber. And you could set, based on where it was you were going for the night, you could set a fixed amount for how much you want to leave. So it leaves all that hassle, any of the negative feelings you might have of, oh, what is this person going to think when I do this? Do I leave a tip? Do I not? That's all handled. And so really what this boils down to is Uber took something that people were already using. They looked at what wasn't working. What are the features that are missing from an enjoyable taxi experience? And they fixed them. They provided a solution. And they used that doing a number of features that would wow their customers. The reality is, for most of us, creating multiple wow moments with your product takes time. Nothing happens overnight. Most of us don't get it right the first time. Jeff talked earlier about scaling and building something that you're gonna have to refactor. Just to point out, yeah, we can all look back and go, hey, right on Uber, you did a great job. But the fact is, it took them a year to get to this point. Their first app took a year and it was only in one city. So, the reality is these things do take time, but the good thing is that they take time so that we can get them right. So for all of us in the room, can we do this? Are we capable of doing something like this? Yeah, absolutely. I think anybody is capable of releasing products that solve people's problems. The key is, how do you have enough foresight to understand who your user is, understand the solution that you want to provide a particular industry, and then what does it look like to go after it? So the name of the talk was, why 50 features is less than one solution? Why is that? Because really when you look at providing a solution, you're really framing it around one question. How do users currently solve, and then insert whatever you want in there. How do they currently solve hailing down a taxi? How do they currently solve playing music in their homes? How do they do X? Asking this question, even at the outset, before anything is built, is critical, because understanding your user and the major elements of their problem drives the development of where you're going to go. So you've got 2 founders, 3 founders, 4 founders, all wanting to build something. How do you pick what's going to be the right thing to build? How do you know the things that are going to ultimately make you successful? By understanding what your user is doing in the particular market that you're going after, you will begin to frame a solution full of features that will solve their problem. A couple different times that we want to ask this question. really all the time. And as engineers, we kind of tend to chunk out the different things that we're building. So obviously you're planning to do something, you're doing something, and then you're trying to figure out what to build next. Really, asking how your users solve a particular problem needs to happen all the time. It needs to happen when you're thinking about what to build, when you're building it, and when you're released, and then obviously post-release, asking it again. So when you're planning, you're thinking about, okay, what do we do? What are we going to release? How do we get into the market? Or how do we grow our particular market? Or how do we increase revenue for somewhere we already are? Understanding how people are going to act tomorrow is understanding what they do today. Most consumers, or even in B2B segments, we work with accountants and large financial teams. It's not rocket science. They're creatures of habit, just like consumers. They want things to be easy, they want to be able to get their work done, and they don't want to get in trouble for it. Consumers, they may want to buy something, they want to have it dropped off very easily, they don't want to have to go somewhere, they want to know when something's out of stock. These are all habits that people are used to. And so if we can understand what the current behavior of a target user is, we can then begin to predict what it looks like in the future to give them other things that they would want to use. So planning at the very outset, rather than just jumping in and building stuff, is a great way to build something that's going to be used for a long time. So even if you do have a product idea, framing it by what problem it solves rather than the thing you're giving them. Don't tell me you're going to put a widget in my hand and it's going to make my life better. Tell me what problem you're going to solve for me, and then I'm going to have an interest in what it is, either a service or application that you may be building. In the middle of building it, a lot of these things, Jeff talked about getting into production early, and yeah, you can, but sometimes the problem's a lot bigger. Sometimes it's multi-month, even 1 to 2 years before you might have what everybody knows as an MVP, something that we can get into the market early, we can get feedback on, but waiting 1 to 2 years sounds pretty risky if my money's involved. If I'm paying for this thing to get built and released, I'm going to want to know a lot quicker, am I on the right path? And so when you're building something, even in the middle, it's critical that you're asking this question again. What is the problem that we're solving for our user by what we're doing? It may help you take a look at this problem with fresh eyes. You may realize, hey, the team's gotten off track, whether under the burden of deadlines or whatever may have you. Wanting to go after VC funding, you may be able to step back and say, wait a second, we've lost our foundation here. Let's step back and take a look at reminding ourselves what it is we're going after. It can also help you fine-tune your idea. You may realize, hey, some of these things that we're building that help solve this problem aren't needed right now. We can actually get out the door quicker and hopefully start making some money, and then come back and maybe release this in the next version. Releasing something that is feature-rich does not always mean it's solution-relevant. So you may find that you're able to release things much faster by stepping back and taking a look while you're building. And then, of course, after releasing. So, if you're with a large team or you have CDPs like Jeff described, we have a great benefit of being able to talk, one-to-one with people a lot. People like using our product. It saves marriages, so they're very encouraged to answer the phone when we want to give them a ring. But, observing your audience, whether analytics, direct conversations, understanding patterns through A/B testing, whatever conduit that you may go after to help understand what's going on with your user after you release, tells you a couple things. Not only tells you what you might want to go after next, you may find, hey, we were going to build something that did Y, and we realized by doing X, it solves a bigger pain point, and it helps us better pivot to a particular direction. It may also, give you very direct feedback with all of your users. I mean, having that one-on-one FaceTime and understanding and talking with users and literally seeing what they're doing is something that you will only be able to guess if you don't take the time to reach out and understand directly. So, of course, asking questions is great. We can sit around, we can ask a lot of questions, we can ask how do users solve this, but ultimately, getting the answers is really the key. Getting answers is even better, because questions are nothing if we don't know how to answer them. So how do we do that? Well, an easy way, and it's going to be very unfancy, I guess, is observation. That's really the secret. There is no magic behind talking to users. There's nothing you need to do socially that maybe you're not qualified to do. Literally just observing and getting those answers to things that you want to know about is kind of the secret sauce for this. So we think about observation, we think about a couple different ways that we can find this. We have a couple different keywords up here that talk about what it looks like to observe. So you can be literally in the field observing them. You can do research, which doesn't involve necessarily a whole lot of conversation, but maybe just understanding who the user is that you're going after. You can do contextual inquiries, guided tours, where you're actually driving the user through what it is they need to get done. You can do fly-on-the-wall type observation, where you're not saying anything, you're just watching, and maybe you're using eye tracking or heat map for clicks, or something a little bit more academic, ethnography. All of these things will work. Really, any of them is better than nothing. But really, the only difference between all of these different tools that you can use to observe users when building products has to deal with how much you want to interact. Now, I've heard often maybe engineers don't want to be the most social people in the world with their users. So you have some different things like shadowing or recording what it is they're doing so you can go back and later observe any pain points they have when using something. Or if in the benefit of Workiva, we have a fairly large team of user researchers that can help us get really deep insight into what our users want to accomplish. And so you start to get to that other end of the scale where you're dealing with a lot more interaction. So, you look at things like fly-on-the-wall techniques, shadowing, no direct interaction. You're watching, you're taking notes, and obviously you get to the right side of the scale and you get quite a bit more verbal communication and one-on-one type interviewing. So, at the end of the day, these are all just really fancy terms. It doesn't really matter what you call it. As long as you are actively participating and looking at what a person is doing in their natural environment, not under stress, not under pressure to purchase, not, distracted with a competitor's product, you're in the observation business. So this is something we can all do regardless of what it is that we want to call it. So what does it look like to observe? Well, really, there's kind of 5 characteristics of observation when you're talking or observing users that I wanted to kind of leave you with. It involves observing, listening, noticing, gathering, and interpreting. So when you're observing, obviously by nature, when you're observing, you're watching as they go about their daily lives. Again, you want to try and keep a neutral environment where you're seeing how it is that they go after their day-to-day. Based on that, you will start to get a script of how their pain points shake out. At what point are they becoming tripped up by a particular process? When are they becoming confused? When is something that you built maybe not working as you had thought? You're also listening. I found a good example. When you deal with online banking, if we were to go and looking at getting a mortgage, I would go to Bank of America or Wells Fargo or any of the other local banks, and I would probably search for mortgage. The reality is a big failure for most banking websites is they call mortgages loans, which is not probably something that most of us in the room would use to describe what it is we're looking for right out of the gate. So listening to how your users talk about problems they're having, listening to how the language they use describes any difficulty they may be having or what it is that they're looking for is also a very, very powerful observation technique. Noticing really has to do, we talk about listening, being one type of characteristic. Noticing, what does their body language say? Are you seeing the user tense up or become angry over something that's difficult to complete? Do you notice that they get confused? One of the biggest things we see in user testing is nobody wants to feel dumb. You put something in front of somebody, they'll sit there and mess with it for 5-10 minutes before they want to reach out and ask for help. So what are you noticing about how users are taking advantage of your products? Do they become easily frustrated? Are they tensing up? Is their body language signaling something? Are they getting frustrated and just closing, whatever it is that you have open and moving on to something else? Really using a visual technique of observation to see what it is that the user is doing is also a very powerful point. Gathering. So when we talk about gathering, you may go visit a customer or do a beta test or Even go down to a coffee shop and just ask random people to see if they could, try out what it is you're building. Gathering has to deal with the fact of what are the literal artifacts that they may use and what it is they're completing. I just threw a quick example up here. If you were conducting an observation, you wanted to build some type of app that dealt with grocery stores, whether building a list, buying stuff and having it delivered, you would tend to look for gathering of artifacts that dealt with things like their grocery list. Who's going with them to the store? Are they the person that takes like all 4 kids to Walmart, or are they going by themselves at night because it's easier? There's a lot of different habits and things that people go about when using products or services that give you insight into what they're doing. Taking 4 kids to the grocery store on a Sunday when everyone else is there is probably not a very enjoyable experience versus, going later in the evening when everybody has gone to sleep. So what artifacts for your particular target user, what artifacts could you get from them that will help you understand more about what they're doing? And of course, after you're done with all of this, you're going to have a lot of stuff. You're going to have things that you've heard, you're going to have things that you've observed with your eyes, you're going to have artifacts that you're going to want to collect and make use of. Really at this point, you've now got all this information in your head, and you say, okay, I understand, our target user is this person. How do we interpret, how do we make use of all the data that they've given us? And then what do we do with it? Now, ultimately, most of the data that you get, whether it's written down, it's recorded, it's a screencast, whatever, these end up becoming personas. And really, personas are all about understanding this is what my target user looks like. This is the difficulties they have. This is why we could provide them something that would give them a solution, or this is how we need to alter what it is that we're building so that we can better serve our customers and users. So interpreting really becomes about how do we define what it is to target our particular persona. Now again, a lot of this has to deal with common sense, but really at the end of the day, something very simple, just as observing, with all its lack of bells and whistles, observation does work. And the reason is, it'll help you and your team validate what it is that you're building. You're either going to realize, hey, we're on the right path, or we're going the wrong way, or we didn't think about X and when we were building Y. It'll help you understand new problems that your users may be having. So things that maybe you didn't realize. Many of us today are tasked with building products for use cases that we're not involved with. I'm not an accountant. I do not have an accounting degree, but yet we build software to serve an accounting segment of the community that has to do these very large financial filings. So it's always very, very important to remember, the core rule, very few of us are the target user. But yet often we spend a lot of time thinking about how we might use something rather than understanding who our target user is. So understanding things like what their problems are, what are their goals and motivations. Jeff mentioned earlier one of the key quotes about recovering time. I remember early on, before web filings was released, every quarter accountants would have to basically spend 2-3 weeks of their life, night and day, getting together very, very strict financial reporting numbers that they would go to jail for if they didn't go correct. Even worse, you might end up as a CFO getting in trouble because someone underneath you didn't, file something correctly. So for us early on, I remember one of the key quotes when I first started, there was a person that left something at one of the user conferences talking about Workiva, at that time web filings, has literally helped me get home for dinner 10 extra days that I would have lost every quarter. Now you're thinking 4 times a year, 2-3 weeks, this man or woman is away from their family, their spouse, whatever, doing these financial filings because they have to. That's the reality. And through a piece of software we built, we were able to help that person get home so they could be with the people that they wanted to many more times than they would have without using it. So that's also very powerful. And as someone not in an accounting, I guess an accounting department or that accounting role, how would we have ever known that? Except through observing our users, understanding what their pain points are, what are their motivations, and then providing them a solution that took care of that. And ultimately, when we talk about observation, it's a technique and it leads us to empathy. It's a quote I pulled down and says, in order to get to new solutions, you have to know different people, different scenarios, different places. Most of us can pull up a computer and make it do incredible things. We can create, We can do this AWS deploy, which is not my primary skill set. We can do things that most people cannot do. When you get to a target user, 9 times out of 10, they're not familiar, whether they are alienated by their age, by lack of availability to a particular device, based on their industry. All of what they're used to doing is probably not how you are used to doing it in your own daily workflow. So really the whole point of observing users, understanding what it is that they're doing and their motivations, is to give us a place of empathy so that we can relate to them and really put ourselves in their shoes when we look to build products and services that meet their needs. The last thing I wanted to talk about is, it's great, we've observed people, we get to understand why it is they do what they do, we understand what problems they have, we understand why they're motivated, whether it's because they have to, because they want to, and we start building. And we try to figure out what it is we're building, whether or not it's going to work. We call that validation. I don't think anybody in the room would like to spend 1 to 2 years or longer building something to release it to market or whatever your target goal is to realize it doesn't work. That's no good. There's really 2 ways you can validate any solution that you come up with. And really a solution at this point is a hypothesis. You have an idea about a problem you want to solve, and now you've built something to put in front of somebody to see if it does it, right? Much, much better than investing a lot more man hours to realize you're wrong. So we can do that internally, depending on the makeup of your team and company, or we can do it externally with users. So we'll just briefly go through that. Internal validation. Obviously anybody in the room probably knows about Slack, and who would have thought we would have all been so excited about an instant messaging tool, but if you use it, you kind of look at things like Skype and HipChat and Google Talk, and you kind of laugh because Slack is really that much better. There's an article that came out in, I think it's Fast Inc., that talked about how they really validate internally. Obviously, they're a much bigger company, not a Workiva or Oracle size, but a couple hundred people, and they're in a great spot. They're trying to improve team communication. So what better way to figure out if what they're building is valuable than to have everybody in their company using Slack? So we call that dog fooding. It's a big thing at Workiva. We do a number of things with Excel competitors, text document competitors, presentation, digital, we call them binders, which package up files for annotation. We have a mobile offering, as I mentioned earlier. And we really try and hammer home, like today, some of our beta stuff is not as good as Google Docs. Google Docs is easier to use, but I don't work for Google, so I try and use our text editor, because the reality is the more that I'm using our own tools, the better insight I have to help that team release a better product. And so that's what I mean when I talk about dog fooding. Also, whether you're just a 5-person startup or a 10-person startup or whatever, chances are it's not all engineers. You might have an office person, you might have QA or engineers, or maybe you have a designer on staff. These people represent departments. And so what I think I'm trying to say by showing this is that, if you're looking at, Slack had a use case in this article where they were talking about, wanting to see how to better serve the finance teams in larger companies. How do finance teams want to send data back and forth? How do they communicate? What are their patterns? What makes it difficult for them to communicate to a larger part of the company? So they didn't have to go look for a finance team. They just walked down the hall and started using their software and installed it on their own finance team's computers and started going after that. So even if you have one person outside of your area that you're trying to learn about, and they actually work for you, the best thing you can do is have them start to use your particular service and see what it is that they can provide you feedback on. Most of us, however, will deal with external validation. Jeff mentioned earlier CDPs, that's our candidate development partners. They deal a lot with our beta software. They're already in love with the software. They want to see where we're going tomorrow, so they're much more patient with some of our less than polished features. And you may be in the same place. If you're building a beta application, like I said, you're going to want to know how it works and if it is providing a value before you release it out to the App Store or you deploy it to a website. So a couple different ways that you can collect validation externally. You can have feedback within your app or offering. You can use third-party feedback tools if you don't have the resources to build it yourself. You can use dedicated IM channels, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about Slack in that regard. And then you can deal with things like customer calls and on-site visits. Customer calls are great if you can't get to that particular location. Obviously, nothing will ever replace seeing someone face-to-face and observing them with a hands-on approach. Here's an example of how we do it at Workiva. This is an internal release of our text editing tool. And I don't think there's anything sensitive in here, so that's good. But we have a very large feedback button in the top right. And this particular team collects all this feedback, and then they automate it to Jira, which is like a Trello or any sort of ticketing system. So that I can come on here and say, hey, it'd be really great if I could use keyboard shortcuts to show or hide the rulers, or indent and outdent. Here are things that are buggy. Here are things that broke while I was using it. Here's a screencast of something I was trying to do that didn't work. Or other types of feedback that you can give a particular team as to why something may work or not work. So, this not only would work for external users, but it's also a great internal tool as well. If you're building something that you can make use of in your day-to-day workflow, having a conduit, if your team has the bandwidth, to collect that type of feedback is a great way to have continuous input from users. I called up Ben yesterday and asked him if I could use the screenshot. So on the left-hand side is Ignite Feedback, which is a great local company. Ben and his team have built a little third-party widget that you can embed on your website. And you can ask users certain things in a non-intrusive way. You're not getting a lot of pop-ups. You're not doing a lot of things like that. But you're asking them, hey, what do you think about this particular service? Do you have questions? Do you need a follow-up to what it is that you're doing? And on the right side is an example of another tool called Help Scout. And again, same thing. You've got a little JavaScript snippet. You embed it at a very unobtrusive area of your site. And that just constantly is collecting information for you. So if you're not in a place where you feel comfortable talking face-to-face with people, or you want something that is always on, and you don't want to build it yourself, these are just two great examples of tools that you can make use of. External validation with dedicated IM channels. I think one of the things that Slack does really well, when you think about a chat tool, there's no real big expectation. I want to type something, I want to send it, maybe I want to send a picture, but really the power of Slack comes with its add-ons. Its ability to harness other tools outside of itself in terms of how it integrates is fantastic. So if you're a small startup, Slack is free. Now you're going to lose messages after you hit about 10,000, but you can simply just start up mycompany.slack.com. You can invite people to join a public chat room, and then that's another way that they can send you continuous feedback so that you can learn about what it is that people find valuable about the tool that you're wanting to release. This particular use case, you can actually use an add-on for Slack where it will push everything out to a Google Sheet or another type of data collector so that you'll have some sort of record of what it is that people were asking you about. And I think for the user, if we think about the experience we have when we go to a particular product or service and we fill out a contact form, like if I email a bank about something, I really don't ever expect to hear back, which kind of is silly as to why I even fill it out. But the benefit of having something like an always-on instant message device where you can utilize add-ons to collect information would really give the user a sense of being valued. And obviously, user loyalty in product release and development is a big deal. One of the other things, again, if you're in an area where you can actually visit with customers and either talk to them, really you've got a whole bunch of users and then you have a core set of users, your customers, your target user. If you get a chance to go meet with someone either virtually or face-to-face, definitely make sure that you're talking to the right person. You want to make sure that it's the right persona of who it is that you need to reach out to. It's not someone that got shimmied into a particular calendar event at the last minute because the person you wanted to talk to wasn't available. So always when you're dealing with people in either a virtual face-to-face manner, figure out and make sure that you're meeting with the right people. Second thing, and it's always funny, I'm not brave enough to do live demos, but when you're dealing with a customer and you want to show them something or you want to get user feedback and testing, do a dry run. Figure out what it is you want to show them. figure out what the tracer bullet or the flow through your particular service is going to be, and do it a couple times. Because there is nothing more embarrassing than taking time out of someone's day, showing up, and then having something not work. So the reality is it's going to happen. You know, a number of times we've talked about, you know, people, just things happen. The internet is kind of a moving object, and stuff goes wrong. That doesn't mean it has to cause you to lose value of why you're there. So, you know, in addition to being prepared to talk with customers and making sure your technology is good to go, in the event something goes wrong, make sure you have screenshots, print screens of what it is that you're trying to validate. Paper prototyping is a completely valid resource for showing and getting feedback from users and understanding the solution to build. Have a couple screencasts. If whatever it is that you want to show them goes down, do you have a backup plan to walk them through so at least you can get some sort of feedback? And then lastly, you know, just having a series of backup questions. If I didn't have anything to show this person, I lost my laptop or whatever, what is it that would still provide value for wanting to talk to my user and asking them to set aside time? You know, the reality of all of this, observing people, understanding how to build solutions, you know, much of product development for anybody that's released something or taken it to market, much of it looks like this. It's kind of a mess in the beginning, right? You're trying to figure out who it is that is going to buy something that you want to build. You've got an idea or some sort of concept. You're trying to figure out ways to validate it, and then you're iterating on it. You're not going to, most of the time, you're not going to be right. And sometimes you're going to build things that you end up realizing people aren't going to want. So really kind of what this graphic represents is, you know, up front, the more you can do to understand who it is you're building for and what their motivations are, it's going to create a lot of smooth roads down in the future when you get to actually building it and looking to release it. So building good products is very, very challenging. Just a quick recap. I know we're coming up on lunch. So really 5 things that I wanted to leave you with today. Successful products solve problems. If your product does not solve a problem, it doesn't matter. I don't care, you know, how many people checked in with Foursquare today? Like, who uses that anymore? So if you're not solving a problem, good luck to you. I would like you to prove me wrong, but it's probably not going to go well. You and your team should be asking why. This is not the UX guy's problem. It's not the CTO's problem. You know, a lot of it does fall on engineers. Why are we doing this? What are the motivations? What does our core user look like? Would they use this? And you know, remembering that you're not the target user in most cases. We know we're not the target user because hopefully we're observing users. We're looking at who it is that we need to deal with. And we're talking with them while we're planning. We're talking with them during the middle of development. And we're talking with them post-release so we understand where to go next. All of this helps you create empathy, a relationship of understanding your user and putting yourself in their shoes so you really can build something that will solve what it is they need to get done. The validation at the end really confirms that you know the user well enough to give them a solution, or you know where to pivot to next. So validation, showing things early and often is going to